Is it still morning? It is still morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing a Saturday. Time is precious. That's kind of a bromide, but look, it's Saturday. It's February. You could be skiing. You could be shoveling snow. You could be trying to entertain your 12-year-old and your 8-year-old, right, Chris and Junie? Trying to figure out what to do with your little ones. I'm really pleased to do this, as Brian mentioned, with David Stevenson. I'm the co-organizer of the IoT Meetup New England. That's David Stevenson's brainchild. I've just helped him make it happen. We have almost 400 members, entrepreneurs, investors, students, experienced general managers, bon vivants, rabble-rousers, revolutionaries. Everyone's welcome. And the topic is simply to help everyone understand that they've got a role to play in defining, developing, and deploying the Internet of Things. Now, if some people don't like that term, I'm going to use it because that's the IoT Festival's decision. But when people ask me what this thing is, I say it's about instrumenting the physical world. We're going to put devices in, on, or around physical assets or objects that we care about, inventories that we may consume that we care about, and areas of operation, places that we care about. And I think that's a really important conversation because to date, most of the conversation around IoT and related terms for this stuff has focused on manufactured physical assets. And what I want to do is introduce you to some people who are, or have been, or are in the business of instrumenting the physical world, but they're not so much focused on smart appliances or manufactured or machined assets. These folks are focusing on instrumenting the large and landscape scale assets. See, we don't talk about that enough. And so when you think about a city or a farm, I think you're talking about two of the most important larger landscape scale assets we will manage, we will live in, we will develop over the next 50 years. And so what I want to do is bring some people in and talk to you about how they're instrumenting the physical world, focusing on large and landscape scale assets. Brett Norman is co-founder of a company called AgSmart. Tell us, 30 seconds, no commercial, but tell us what you're doing, and then we'll go around quick, but then what I want to get to is the storytelling. So, just a little more.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Brett Norman, AgSmart's the company. What we do is we automate irrigation systems for commercial farming operations. Primarily pivots is what you may have seen, these large metal spans that go over agronomic crops and rotate in a circle. We take environmental sensing off the field and off the equipment to initiate irrigation events for that particular crop, knowing what's in the ground, what the soil types are, and what the environmental feedback is, soil moisture, temperature, humidity levels. And what that does is dramatically decrease your water and energy usage to lift the pumping of the water. But it also helps you maximize or optimize your crop yield outcomes.
So that's awesome. So it sounds like precision ag, but precision ag's been around for a while, and a lot of people say, I don't know if it works or not. How is what you're doing different? And can you tell us about some of the outcomes from some of the pilots?
What it is, there's a lot of precision ag technology. I think agriculture, if you look at it overall, is probably one of the quickest, or maybe the most rapid adopter of technology at this stage of the game. And where we are different is we close the loop, we automate this. It's not just about environment for some time, it's about doing something with that immediate environmental feedback. So we call that close the loop. So we've got controllers that are receiving this data, they're IP-enabled. That data is pushed up to the web. The analytics in the web are crunching prescriptions for that irrigation system, feeding that back down to the pivot, and then delivering that water when, where, and precisely in the amount that's needed.
So, huge point, and for those of you that have been in this, I spent the last 2 days with about 50 people from 25 of the Fortune 500 enterprises, non-technology companies. One of the major questions that came out of that session was actuation. We're doing lots of sensing, and we're doing lots of warehousing and storing of data, but we're now talking about struggling with analytics. Once we get the analytics nailed down, then we're going to be struggling with actuation. And so whether the actuation is automated, as you're doing, taking sensors from the ground and feeding through the cloud an instruction set to a controller on a piece of irrigation equipment, that's actuation. Yes. And so to me, hearing it, I would say that's one of the key differences, one of the ways you're trying to take precision ag a little further. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think if you talk to most producers today, they're anything but lacking for data. I mean, they're inundated with decision making from the equipments, the implements themselves that are taking geolocation, yield data off of their combines and such. I would say they're at a point of just throwing their hands up in a lot of these situations. So we're really hoping to relieve them of this burden. Now the data, it's their data, they'll have access to it. They can do analytics on their own, but the real power we're hoping to bring to it is that there's something that can be done with it automatically. The machine knows when the field speaks for itself. Cool.
I'm going to give him 1 point for not using the term big data. Nicely. All right. So my next fine young friend is Mike Helfrich, and he's the founder and CEO of a company called Blue Force Development. They're up in Salem, Massachusetts, and I met Mike a year or two ago, and we've been on a journey together because I started my firm a few years ago, and you started yours a few years ago. Mike's expertise is in the national security and public safety spaces. But it doesn't mean it's surveillance, and it doesn't mean it's spooky, and it doesn't mean it's invasive. What Mike's teams do are they deploy IoT and M2M technologies to enable people, operators, first responders, but people doing work in the physical world to do it better, to do it more safely. That's my commercial to you, out of professional love and personal respect. But why don't you tell us a couple of stories?
Well, thank you very much, and Chris, thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for inviting me to come in this morning. As Chris said, my company, I actually moved to Newburyport, Massachusetts about 6 months ago, so we are based here. As Chris said, most of my customers blow things up and break things, I joke, but they also deliver humanitarian services. They also deliver civil support capabilities to communities that are in need. And the story that I think back to when I started my company started in 2004. I worked for Ray Ozzie at Group Networks up in Beverly. And we were doing a great deal of work in the national security infrastructure. And I visited a SEAL team commander down in Virginia Beach area who told me his biggest problem was when he goes to conduct operations, he deploys with 20 or 25 different sensors, everything from monitoring someone's heart rate, everything from deploying seismic and magnetometer sensors in the battle space. But his issue was there was no way to share that data amongst the people he was deployed with to truly impact their life safety, but also enhance operational efficiency, because each one of these applications was siloed, a discrete communications channel, a discrete data format, and the only person who could make sense of it was the commander, but then he couldn't make sense of it because he had to look across 20 different applications. We've developed software for mobile devices that's fundamentally about geospatial location fused with body-worn and person-carried sensing data that is shared horizontally in a highly secure construct, but also has the ability to integrate and just-in-time subscribe to autonomous agents. Agents that provide me access to national assets, but also agents that conduct calculation and forensics and different types of things. So that's our story. It's largely last tactical mile users, firefighters, paramedics, police, law enforcement. We've embedded dogs with embedded body temperature sensors and other types of biometrics. And we make that data shareable in an NSA-certified crypto environment.
Cool. So two things I want to talk with you about, or with the crew about. The first one is, again, trying to pick up on what these people are doing that's a little bit different, and the reasons why I like spending time with them. We're all talking about silos and the Internet of Silos, and there are lots of people, researchers and scientists, Nobel laureates, and lots of you geniuses here doing the hard work. I do the easy stuff. I talk about it. And what y'all are figuring out is that we can't build an Internet of Silos quickly enough because we have so many vested interests trying to extend their current positions. We're arriving almost a priori to an Internet of Silos. Sounds like you identified in a very specific environment. Each sensor had its own quote-unquote virtual or digital infrastructure, and it made for an impossible value proposition for your folks. Is that about right, that you found a way to work through the silos? Maybe it's a smaller environment, smaller application profile, but am I reading you right that that's one of the key value propositions?
That is the key value proposition. It's the concept of fused sensor data into a single secure stream, shareable horizontally, but also more importantly the ability to just in time invite autonomous agents in that can interpret and make sense of the data when the operator is missing the small data points.
So another one. I spent some time, for those of you that have been with big tech, I spent some time, it started maybe a year and a half ago, and one of the big networking vendors had a number of conferences, and persistently over 2 years what came out of the conference was, one of the things we need in the infrastructure for the Internet of Things is for each individual object to be self-defining, identifying, describing, number one, and number two, to be able to not just execute transactions in real time, but to negotiate if that transaction should take place, execute the transaction, and then cover off or close that transaction. Is that what you talk about when you say that you can bring in these artificial agents in real time on a transaction or a moment basis?
Precisely. And I'll talk a little bit about network-centric operations as you see fit in the presentation. But we have shifted from predictive order-based conflict to decentralized asymmetric conflict. And this requires a very different fundamental approach to information and how you share it, the actionability of it, and the aging of the information. It's a concept of just-in-time congregations of people, sensors, and information services that can discover each other, but also make suggestions on information that is already learned.
Cool. So the second thing I wanted to elevate for everyone is you started respectfully with the concept of breaking and taking. But now most of your work is in saving and serving, right?
Yes, sir.
So can you talk a little bit about the relationship with one of the major carriers and how your work from that domain has transferred into the first responder public safety and the saving and serving concept?
Absolutely. So I mean, one of the areas that was completely unanticipated, it's nowhere in our business plan from 2005, was the concept of non-human endpoints, right? Still carbon-based. But today, we are putting microcomputer, Internet of Things, communications chips inside of canines, working dogs. And the genesis of it was certainly in the law enforcement arena, in the defense space, but now it's moving over into canines that not only do narcotics and bomb sniffing, but canines that will detect an impending seizure in a child. Canines that can detect subtle changes in galvanic skin response and the aromas put out by a child who is tracking high for a type 1 diabetic environment. So we are starting to move these types of physiological tracking, monitoring of the animal, but also monitoring a dog's response as one example. Even before the dog exhibits, we can detect physiological markers that exhibit themselves before the dog even sits or paws to indicate that there's an impending problem, either a health problem or something else, or a detection.
Cool. So for me, having Mike here is, if we're going to talk about a big concept such as smart cities, we should talk about what makes a city attractive. And I think if you read Brookings Institute or you read the Urban Institute work and the Metropolitan Revolution, pick any of those sources. Safe cities are attractive cities. And so some of the tools and technologies you're deploying are making a lot of those cities safer. Right. Another trend that you two guys have brought up, and I want to bridge now over to Shawana, is this idea of a common operating picture or closing the loop. And so when you think about a larger landscape scale asset such as a city, which represents an area of operation for a fire department, or you think about a farm, you really have to understand that we're talking about some real challenges with space to create a common operating picture. That arrives me at the desk of Dr. Shawana Johnson. I tell people is essentially one of the taproots of spatial intelligence or satellite intelligence only on the planet Earth, just for her. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about why you think GeoInt or geospatial intelligence adds value or matters as we think about IoT?
Sure. So imagery intelligence really combines a lot of above ground sensors, remotely sensed sensors, airborne, spaceborne, and those sensors reliably have always fed into a system that then can analyze that data in a way that it provides a very specific message and a set of answers to whoever the user of that was. Years ago, that world was commercialized and that technology came out of the DoD and the government, and that technology then became one of the underpinning resources for managing the Earth's agriculture and water resources globally. So when you have a chance, look up on the internet the Great Grain Robbery. And when you look up the Great Grain Robbery, you'll understand why that satellite was deployed to be of commercial value. So we look at the Earth and its resources from a very high-level global perspective. But what that doesn't do is get us down to the ground level, which we call ground truthing, which for years had to be done by an individual that was field forward deployed to give us some of the feedback on that water resource or that agricultural area. So in places like where Brett works, And with AgSmart, that provides us with sensors that are on the ground, you can update that global perspective of what's going on in water resources and agriculture with a really up-to-date, minute-by-minute perspective. So a satellite image can tell you trouble in that field. It looks water resource deprived. We don't know exactly if it's deprived because there hasn't been any rain. We haven't looked yet to see if it's an irrigation problem or a canal problem. But by the time that commercial satellite comes around, especially internationally, or an airborne sensor comes back around, it might be too late to have made any adjustment to that crop to save the crop. It's one thing to say it's dying and there's going to be a drought there and let's send food aid, but it's another thing altogether to have sensors that could feed right into the platform that are on the ground and tell us automatically, change your watering practices, change your pesticide practices. Whatever it is you're doing, we can change it now, and then that changes the crop output. We manage the interface between those commercial airborne and spaceborne assets and the ground truth assets. We bridge that gap between the commercial world and the Department of Defense and intelligence and the federal civil community.
Awesome, great intro. I really appreciate it. So, in your world, you've got lots of imagery, right? But you've also got some other.
But not big data.
But a couple other things we're not going to say. We'll write them later. But tell me about, and that's a great example. But tell me about how GeoInt or satellite intelligence helps people make money, because making money is not a bad thing. Capitalism, as a concept is awesome. Maybe our practice of it today could use some tweaking, but how do we make money with GeoInt? Can you tell us a little bit about how some commercial or some industrial enterprises might use GeoInt to help lower cost, enhance compliance to safety regulations, drive revenue, all the things that matter in income statements and profit and loss statements? Tell us a little bit how people are using GeoInt today to make dough.
So typically in that world, the commercial industry sectors that have used it are oil and gas, maritime, then agriculture, and then water resources. The difficulty is it was typically taken on by another government because they could afford the imagery and afford the system that had to manage it, because it was pretty intensive processing. So now there are capabilities, and Mark kind of referred to it a little bit because he's, I'm sorry, Mike, referred to it a little bit when he talked about the fact that we have these great capabilities coming out of the military and the technologies and MIT and places like that, but they haven't quite made it to the commercial end user. There are organizations now who have that underpinning and understanding of architectural platforms that understand the architectural platform that is needed to bring in multiple sensors, manage the metadata on the fly in near real time, and produce an answer for whatever the question is, and really a query system. So we work a lot with organizations who are taking this capability that has been created over time, working with hundreds of sensors. And now they're using the beauty of search engines to say, I'm a consumer or I'm a businessman. I have an oil and gas platform out there. I know I can track the wind over here at NASA, but I'm having a hard time taking that wind measurement and manning it right into my platform to tell my people on the platform what they need to do. They're looking at two different things, and then they have to make a decision. Now you can take the wind instrumentation. You can put it on a platform where there's also global imagery provided, and the person can query it and just ask a question. So we work with system integrators that do this kind of interoperable architecture that's done for real-time, on-the-fly questioning. And that's then how the consumer or the rest of the world can make money in that. But the difference is they're not building it all themselves. They're going out and getting hundreds of other vendors to support them. So they don't want to make the money, and they don't want to build the system all themselves. They have a platform, and they're building almost a partner plan so that partners can come in and supply the apps out while they make sure everything is communicating at that architectural level.
Cool. So So the idea for this session was to try and create a new context for you. And the first dimension of the context is think about a different class of asset, larger landscape scale asset. The second context was try and bring some people together who have attacked some of the issues. Whether the issue was closing the loop with actuation, or the issue was silos, or the issue with Shawana evidencing it is, and we're hearing this, data from our market intelligence and our work in the real world tells us this third issue is context. I have to make sure that it integrates with other sources of data or information that I already have. I want to put a fine point on that before we let some folks ask some questions, but for those of you that are developing solutions that you think are going to have commercial opportunity, please do not blow past one of the most important salient facts of the market today. Most enterprises will not say this publicly, but they are drowning in data that they already have. Literally, this instrumentation of the physical world ain't new. Many industrial equipment OEMs, many consumer products manufacturers, many service providers from one domain of our lives or another have built businesses on collecting data and then trying to figure out how that data can be turned into value. They may have only, it's kind of like the brain maybe, 8, 9, 10, 11% has been used. So for those of you that are thinking about developing or deploying systems, I love the lessons that you guys have shared. Now, are there cases or are there examples or stories, nice, tight, short ones that you want to share, or should we go to the room and ask questions? Brett?
No, I can talk about running Kanban and document producers, but I mean, I will say this. We talked a little bit about the landscape too, and touched on water. I don't think people, in my opinion, realize the extent of some of the water issues we have as a country, as a world. Producers see this every day because that equates to yield and their livelihood. So, where we started, we kind of fell into the Internet of Things coming from the automation world, but we really started with a problem, at the ground level for them, and that was, my well used to be at 50 feet, now it's at 250 feet. And when my grandchild wants to farm the same land that I've been on since my great-grandfather was farming, he's not going to have, or he or she are not going to have water to produce the crops that I do today. So I don't know, that may be a little bit of a human touch.
Actually, it's a very human touch, and it's another reason why I wanted Brett here. I think Brian brought up some article, I forget who the author was, but the title was The Internet of Crap. Sorry, G, my wife is a very formal Portuguese lady, I'm sorry. But that's a mean for, just because we can attach something doesn't mean we should. I mean, we only have so much time. Forget the money for a minute. We only have so much time to do work. And the question is, what are we going to instrument? And why would we instrument it? And what is the value? And I think that's rooted in our values. Look, man, I don't want to get all bromance on you, but I think it's awesome that you're looking at one of the most important resources on the planet. I mean, again, I'm being cute, I don't want to get too preachy. He's talking about instrumenting water. I mean, it is the most precious resource on the planet. When you go outside the United States, people are constantly thinking about water conservation. We rarely do. And I don't think it's a soft, fuzzy, spotted owl, tongue-kissing, pinko liberal thing. I think it's a really smart thing for us to do. And the idea that you would use it to try and preserve or extend or expand or redefine agriculture, well, it's awesome. Let's anyone have questions so I can pipe down and they can, yes, sir.
Congress seems to be able to ignore data. Is there a point in kind of developing these big pictures if they're just ignored by the policymakers?
Well, so the question is, Congress has a habit of ignoring data, and so how is it that, correct me if I'm wrong, but how is it that as we're about building these pictures, rooted in ground truth, with more objectivity and more power in our businesses or for our customers, is there a way to get that into DC, to get them to recognize truth and then change policy, perhaps?
Yes.
Shawana, no offense, but you're the one who knows DC the mostest and bestest, so.
Right. So I agree with you 100%. So this is not an unusual scenario. A few weeks ago, we got a call from a panic-stricken one of our clients at NASA, and they said, oh my gosh, we need you to write a one-pager right away. It needs to go to Congressman blah, blah, blah. who just stood up in front of Congress and said we need to do away with the Earth Sciences satellite budget at NASA because Google satellites are really out there doing the job they need to do, and they put together a drought management map of Mexico City. And I then had to write a one-page white paper that said, oh, by the way, Google doesn't have satellites. They're NASA satellites called MODIS. And they couldn't have made that beautiful little water management map for drought in Mexico City without NASA satellites. To which I got the illustrious response, oh.
So,
from the staffer
follow-up?
that wrote the paper.
Follow-up or clarification to that?
No, you know, it's
But here's the deal.
not going away.
No, it's not. But they are putting together, and I know nobody wants to hear it, but we're seeing progress in the fact that they are starting to coalesce around the fact that there are resources out there, and they leap to what they see every day and forget about the engineering that goes behind things, the science that goes behind things, and this infrastructure that has been set up in this country to address it. There is a working group and a subcommittee being put together. It has been put together right now for that purpose. And I'm proud to say it does not have any of the, usually when those subcommittees come out, I read it and go, oh my God, boring, yawn, same old people, same old thing. It is really reaching into this community and other communities that provide that. But you are not wrong in your summation of what goes on there. And we just have to keep pushing forward because commercially, things develop faster. They develop faster. It might be developed in the DoD and the intel community all over the world, but it comes to a point where it hits a security wall and it stops because it can never make it out of those standards and that model that they have to adhere to. And when things start to get out from under that area, the commercial world wildly advances it. And that's what we're starting to see, more of those things starting to make their way out.
So Mike, a lot of your work is funded through federal grants piped through local agencies, municipalities, or counties.
Right.
Other of it comes from state governments.
Yep.
Do you ever find that there's some a similar misalignment in the local or the state position on what policy requirements are or what operating requirements are for a department or a function or a discipline in a city?
Yeah.
And how you've got to try and help educate and bridge some gross misperception with the realities of that operating environment. Is there anything in there that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, and where we see it, the landscape is ripe with public-private partnerships, and we see a lot of it there. We're on a project right now in the Commonwealth of Virginia where they've got two 40-year-old aging nuclear power plants, and the big concern there is as they hit these walls, they start to break down and start to release gamma radiation. And we've been working on this for a solid year. If you talk to the first responders and you talk to the public safety personnel, there's a third wrinkle to this. They're ready to go. They want to ring the city with curtains of gamma radiological detectors and off-the-shelf weather telemetry. Again, we're there because completely different vendors that don't talk to each other and they can't make sense of the data, where they're getting their money from FEMA and then the governor's office, and then you have a third wrinkle where you actually have the power company down there. So the power company is pushing back against it because they don't want it to be known that there might be small releases of gamma radiation, whereas the public safety people who are in charge of protecting the community need it right away because you're talking about 12 municipalities over a 25-mile stretch, and then you've got FEMA that's trying to fund it. And to your point, it's selling FEMA and the people that own the purse strings that it's better to prevent than to mitigate.
Well, what I like about that is, and I would ask you to think about this in your private industry practices. What we're talking about in large part is a shared asset, or an asset that has both public and private interests explicit for it, with it, about it. We're hearing that a lot in the industrial side. Anything from ag, state level or federal level you want to share?
I was thinking about that as talking. We do partner with USDA and work with their Agricultural Research Services, their ARS. We've got what's called a cradle relationship over in Arkansas. But honestly, I think the biggest challenge is they've got the infrastructure, which is great, but communicating all of the technologies that's rolling out of these research facilities and these, this government agency, I'd say that's the biggest challenge I see, because we're not the only people who are researching and working in this technology with this technology on farms, but it'd be nice if some of that data was shared, and where feasible, not proprietary information, we can learn from each other's mistakes.
So for those of you working in ag or water, it sounds like an offer.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go right here first and then there and try to go a little quicker. Yes, sir.
All right, so following up the issue of the policy, and I work for the government, U.S. federal government, working on cyber physical systems. I don't know how many of you guys heard the term cyber physical system, but it covers everything what you guys just discussed. It's Internet of Things with a lot more focus on the system controls. Okay, so closed loop is a big thing in cyber physical systems. And at the same time, the issue about interoperability, siloed approach, that's a big issue. So first, going back to why policymakers are not exactly listening, they're listening. They're not listening. The question Jeff and I bring on the table working on cyber physical system is, what is the real magical impact? Okay. We talk about protocols. We talk about control loops. We talk about providing big data. We talk about providing platforms. Unless actually the physical systems, manufacturers of physical system industry or academia or embrace it and use it and shows a measurable impact that we go back to again. You cannot just say, oh, we're going to have like 3% GDP increase, or you can have say, oh, 20% efficiency energy saving by paper. Show us. Okay. Show us in business, and if you can show that business can actually prove it, show it, and they actually make money out of it, then it will come. And I think that's the biggest missing thing, the measurable impact. It's very hard to show. Just provide a network protocol, here's interoperable object-oriented, objects that you can use. Unless that's used in the way they can show save jobs, save lives, and create jobs and improve the economy, it's very hard to show that you can make that.
Good point. When you say show ROI for the public sector to make that investment or to make a change in policy, or in general for IoT solutions?
Well, in general, that's what I'm saying. It can be ROI in terms of money, or it can be ROI in terms of saving lives and not a lot of money.
Right.
And so, as long as you can show the actual benefit, tangible benefit, it's very important, tangible, measurable benefit, then things will come.
Great point, thank you. There was someone up top there. Yes, sir, fire away.
This is great stuff. I'm fascinated by it. But you're talking about mobilizing public resources, and the one thing you haven't really talked about is the public. There are, these are large economic interests getting grants, etc., to build platforms for large companies. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're complaining that the government isn't aligned with it, where are the people in this? Where's the effort to democratize data collection? We're looking at really small devices that can talk to anybody. The tradition of the internet is democratization. Are we building a hierarchical structure here when we should be building something more democratic so that everybody knows what the state of water is in their community? Or are we building an intelligence service so that corporations can get insight into crop futures and speculate on commodities? Correct.
Got it. So, love everything you said. Need to correct you on one observation, which is, I know Brett isn't, the correction is this, is that we're not talking about, this panel isn't talking about, we did take a question on, but this isn't about building or deploying the Internet of Things with or for the government, with or for government regulation or investment or approval. So let me be really clear about this. Again, came out of another session 2 weeks ago about 50 investors, entrepreneurs, and large companies. We went around the table and we asked 4 communities: the enterprise, non-technical, technology companies, people, or the government. of those four sort of communities, which one is the most important to get us to a place where we have an Internet of Things that creates authentic value and doesn't further hyper-concentrate capital and opportunities? And the 1-2, the response was the non-technology enterprises and people. And almost nobody cited the government. So I want to be really clear. We're not saying, and I'll say it for me and then you guys can go, I don't think we need the government by definition to roll out a more stable, secure, profitable, authentic, and value-creating IoT. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, they can't do it.
Okay, so I just want,
You're talking about NASA funding, you're talking about grants, and
For private
I
funding.
don't understand, you're talking about the USA, that is the government, that is my tax dollar.
We do research with the USDA, but we don't receive funding.
sure. So
How many home users are going to be able to launch their own satellites, maybe stuff like that?
I don't.
If NASA launches satellites and home users can get access to that data,
So-
that's
So one second. If that data is available through the government and we've already paid for it, why not use it for our solutions? Okay. So you've been up for a while, now we're going to go this side.
Thank you. Yeah, so we touched on the idea of needing to integrate these data sources, and it seems like the fundamental question there is, to what extent do you see the hardware manufacturers manufacturing the sensors and any kind of controls? Are they willing to allow other software vendors to integrate with their hardware in the field, or are you seeing only the closed proprietary approach?
So Mike, can you start? And then
Yeah, I was on the Office of Secretary of Defense's Interoperability Standards Working Group, and one thing government's really good at is getting those types of initiatives going, and then typically industry falls in line because the government won't buy their stuff if they don't have it. But I think I'm about to write a blog post on this. I can go back 6 years now, and Northrop Grumman, and pick your system integrator that was providing complex ground sensors to the United States government, and they were all using proprietary protocols with proprietary security algorithms with different forms of communication, XBIL. And I got to tell you something. I have a Nest at my house. I have a Porky spotter at my house. I've got a Belkin system. They don't talk to each other. So the commercial sector is following straight down the line of first generation for consumer internets of things without those interoperability types of things. Now, you see pockets of people. There's companies coming out of Buffalo, New York, which are just fascinating. They are leveraging the concepts of REST interfaces and REST over TLS and XML and push and pull and query types of protocols. But largely, the big consumer-based Internet of Things providers seem to have this concept of an iPhone app for everything and push notification, but no concept of SMTP or XML or web service types of interfaces. So to me, the jury's out. I think that if someone can commercialize a common relevant operational picture that allows you to compile and construct a dashboard of your home from anywhere in the world, and these little widgets or gadgets actually know how to interpret data coming off of these, that's the kind of thing I think that'll drive consumer electronics more towards, but we don't have that yet.
Question here.
Actually, I just want to follow. You said you could build this without the government. Again, I'm SOCW's partner in crime on the Smart America Challenge in the government. You may try to build it without the government, but if you don't sort of co-opt the government, they get in your way. So I mean, you do need their help.
Great clarification.
So that's to stop that. And then on one of my soapboxes right now is we've sort of started to stomp out the whack-a-mole of proprietary protocols. Pretty much IP is bulldozing over everything. So now we've moved from proprietary protocols, and everyone's embraced IP, but then they just shove it into their proprietary cloud. And then the only access to it, all the devices you talk about, it's like, oh, go to my cloud to get the information. And all we've done is move the problem somewhere else. It ought to be, and I would love to see the Internet of Things be just sending CoAP, SMTP data, whatever it happens to be, wherever you want it to reside, not into somebody's proprietary cloud.
So great migration from the public-private debate to now it's about if we're going to put all these sensors out in the world and we're going to want to authenticate different transactions from different sources, how are we going to do that when we've got the proprietary challenge? Bob, you had a point.
Just a quick comment on the term government, is that there isn't the government. That what we have are mechanisms to coordinate our activities. It could be a contact board, it could be a city council, And so the real thing we should think about is how to do spanning efforts beyond the individual and get rid of the idea that government is King George making all the decisions. And yes, there are times when you go through sort of the central national government, but we have to have a much more distributed view of how we cooperate.
So the point may be that with some of these assets that are in the public domain or shared by public-private partnerships that we want to instrument with a bunch of different vendors to give access to a number of different stakeholders, we've got to talk about multiple levels of cooperation. And this proprietariness, whether it's in protocol or whether it's an operating system or whether it's in, hey, it's my water, we're going to have to work through that on a number of levels. Yeah, and so wait, quick questions, 2 more, yes, sir?
Yeah, so chronic disease is the black hole of our society. And we've got a healthcare delivery system that really isn't systems fragmented. So I'm interested in what you might know or be doing around 2 aspects of that. One, Blue Zones is a project that creates healthy communities. So what are you doing in terms of Internet of Things and Blue Zones? And then secondly, in terms of the person and sensing with respect to the person, the lifestyle changes, helping with lifestyle changes.
Either you want to get into that or?
So I'll give you an overview of one thing that addresses that. So there are several companies who have taken all this capability that they did learn in a heavily induced defense engineering world, and they've created a platform. If you have a chance, go out and look at www.geomarketspace.com. And what they did is they believe, just like the one gentleman said, there's lots of government data. It's free. It should be easy for people to get to. They have gone out and brought in all the silos of the U.S. Department of Agriculture data and the NASA data with, so that you can grab those pieces of data. You don't have to try and figure it out yourself. You can find the part of the world you want to look at. They've been bringing in folks from the medical community and from the Centers for Disease Control. And they have set up a couple of prototypes. I don't know if they'll be on the system yet, but they're prototyping, looking at the demographics of populations, what is going on. These particular demographics are to look at water resource-borne problems and disease related to that, which we really could have used in West Virginia, right, a couple of weeks ago. So that they're taking data that are freely provided, stream gauge data from USGS, and that's out, it's in one place. You don't have to think about how to get to it. It has been built into this beautiful, I would say Google-like environment, but they can now bring in their own partners and parties with their own demographic data, their own statistical data, and they can utilize that statistically, mathematically, and they can also build an app from it that is very easily delivered to someone's mobile device that has to go out into that community and meet with people or go to a certain area of stream management and say, here's what we have to do here. So that's in progress right now.
We're late, we're over, but Brett, I want to give you the last word since you had the first one. Okay. Is, to your point, is it not possible then that smart dirt and water helps us with smart ag, which might help us with better nutrition?
Yeah.
I mean, so can you talk a little bit about how your work might change ag a little bit and might then change foodstuffs, food stores, population health,
We alluded to the optimal use of water, by these sensors, but this platform is expandable. Once you've got the nodes in the field, it can be nutrient management that you're also dealing with. So the accurate use of water is a huge aspect, obviously, but what about the actual or the accurate distribution or application of fertilizers and chemicals on those fields, based on the response directly from the field. So you're not over-fertilizing and therefore not over-watering on top of that, which creates runoff and these hypoxic zones in the Gulf of Mexico, and you're optimizing the food yield from that at the same time from that waterland.
So do you think I'm stretching to try to say that it's possible that your work might actually have an input for chronic disease management, mitigation, or prevention?
I think you look at New Orleans, up from Memphis, Tennessee. St. Jude is there. They have an actual hospital, satellite hospital in New Orleans. Cancer in children in New Orleans is such a high rate, and they attribute that to the water quality levels. New Orleans is at basically the base of the Mississippi River, where all of those nutrients that the chemicals that we're putting into our water streams. So yeah, I'd say, I don't want want to overstate the effect that we're going to have on the world here. But yeah, the accurate, just, application of very potentially dangerous chemicals and those kinds of things can certainly have an effect on public health. And,
Awesome. I'll be the bad guy. We have to stop, right, for lunch?
Yeah,
But
well, we got a follow-on panel, but, so there'll be a chance to bump in if you move through, the afternoon hours.
you guys were awesome. Thanks for coming in from Tennessee.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.